How many soccer balls fit into a helicopter? How much laundry detergent is used in India per year? What's the weight of the Empire State Building? Google, Twitter, Microsoft, and many other tech companies are infamous for asking these seemingly weird but pretty interesting estimation questions, also known as the Fermi problems. These questions are common in case interviews, software engineering interviews, and especially product management interviews. So how is a PM interviewee supposed to answer these questions? Are you expected to come up with a reasonable final number? Is there a particular strategy the interviewer is seeking out? Let's find out. Generally, with these estimation questions, there are a variety of great approaches. Think about the problem critically and explain to the interviewer beforehand how you are planning to go about answering the question. We recommend using a 4-step approach to answer product estimation questions. Let's discuss each one by one. 1. Scope out the problem. 2. Map out your calculations. 3. Round numbers and calculate. And 4th, sense check your results. So step 1 is to ask clarification questions. The first thing you should do is pause, reflect, and if desired, find out additional context by asking a few clarification questions to make sure that you identify exactly what number you need to calculate. In addition, this is also a great way to buy yourself some time. While your conscious brain asks these questions, your subconscious brain should already start working on step 2 of the approach, which is to map out your calculations. Once you know exactly what number you want to calculate, you then need to map the calculation steps to get to that number. This is where you break down the problem into its individual constituents, and we will explain what we mean by this in just a sec. Another important point here is, if you struggle to find a starting point for breaking down a problem, an alternative approach is to begin from the number you want to calculate and draw an issue tree from top to bottom. The advantage of this particular approach is that it will force you to be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Let us go ahead and explain this with a simple example. Let's say the interviewer is asking you to go ahead and calculate the quantity of gas consumed by personal cars in a particular geography. Now, rather than blindly identifying a number, a simple approach is to first have an approximation of the overall population of that particular geography, then use that number to identify an approx number of personal cars in that geography, then approximate the average consumption of a personal car to arrive at the estimate for total consumption. Step 3 is to go ahead, round numbers, and then calculate. Now, post arriving at a structure to answer your question and identifying the individual constituents of your overall estimation, you should always validate your approach with your interviewer by telling them the different calculation steps you are going to take before starting to calculate numbers. This is important because it gives your interviewer a chance to rectify your course of action if they had another plan in mind. Skipping this validation step is extremely risky because your interviewer might realize too late in the exercise that you are approaching the problem in a different way to what they wanted. In our experience, it's almost impossible to recover from that particular situation. Now, once you have agreed on an approach, it's time to start calculating. You will need various data points to get to your final estimate. Now, in most cases, your interviewer will ask you to make your own assumptions to get to the final number, but in some other cases, they might share some valuable data with you as well. So make sure that you actually keep on asking questions. When making assumption, it is vital that you pick simple numbers. For instance, number of days in a year is not 365. In our case, it will be 350. Rounding numbers will make your calculations easier and decrease your likelihood of making a mistake. In addition, you should always talk out loud when doing calculations so that your interviewer can follow your thought process. Know that your interviewer is interested in what's going on in your head rather than the final result. Now, once you have arrived at a final result, step 4 is to sense check your results. Now, most candidates out there, they stop talking at the end of step 3. They look up and they expect their interviewer to tell them if they got the right answer or not. Now, this is always a mistake. The best candidates out there, they sense check their results and they try to spot their own mistakes before telling their interviewer that they are done. Mental calculation errors, they happen frequently. If your interviewer spots a mistake in your calculations, this will definitely play against you. But if you spot your own mistake, you still have a chance. Alright, so now that you know what technique to use to answer product estimation questions, let's apply it to an example in a mock interview scenario.
Hey Rishabh, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks.
So the question that I have for you today is estimate the number of queries answered by Google per second.
Alright, so I need to answer Google's QPS or queries per second. Got it. So this is a typical example of a product estimation question. Got it, yeah.
Okay.
So let me take a few seconds. What I'll do is I'll just go ahead and note down the steps I'm going to take.
Sure.
Alright, so first things first, I have a few questions that I need to get clarified. So when you say Google queries, are we talking about queries across all devices like mobile, web, etc.?
Yes, it's across all form factors.
Okay, perfect. When you say Google, Google comprises of a search engine, comprises of Google Maps, Gmail, GCP, G Suite applications, etc. So which particular business vertical do you want me to focus on?
I want you to focus specifically on Google Search, which is our core business.
Got it. Do we need to consider the global population or do you have a specific geography in mind?
Sure, go ahead with the global population.
Got it. The query per second trend, it varies from hour to hour. So I'm going to assume that you are asking for an average on any given day. Is that a correct assumption?
That's a good assumption. Go ahead.
Okay, so let me go ahead and give you an outline of my approach. So I'm going to estimate the total number of users and multiply that number by average number of searches per user per second. Or put simply, my calculation will look something like this. Google's query per second or QPS is equal to number of internet users using Google search into number of search queries per day upon total seconds in a day. Sounds okay?
Sounds about right.
Alright. So let's break down a problem statement and arrive at certain numbers. First of all, the total number of worldwide internet users, if I remember correctly, I think there are around 5 billion internet users globally.
Okay.
And considering Google is the most widely used search engine across the globe, I'm going to believe they enjoy a market share, let's say north of 70%. I'm going to assume it's 75%. Is that okay?
Sure.
Perfect. At the same time, I believe there are some restrictions on using Google in China and Russia. So we'll factor that in while we go ahead and calculate the number.
Sounds good.
Okay, now I am a heavy internet user being in the tech industry and I go to Google at least, let's say 10 times a day to search for something. However, I would say I lie within the top 10% Google users worldwide. So what I'm thinking is I'll go ahead and do an even distribution like this. So top 10% go for 10 queries a day, next 10% go for 9 queries a day, and so on. I can use this to calculate the average search queries per person per day. Is that a justified assumption?
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the math of this particular calculation. Now, the total internet users is 5 billion, out of which we have already established that China and Russia, they have some strict restrictions on Google. So China has around 1.3 billion people, Russia has slightly less. So I'm going to assume that the overall total population of China and Russia combined is 1.5 billion. Now, what I need to do next is to calculate the number of internet users in this particular geography. Now, the overall world population is 7.5 billion approximately, and we have assumed that 5 billion of them have access to internet. So that comes down to around 66.66% or 2/3 of the overall world population. Now in China, this percentage will be higher as they have internet penetration which is much higher compared to the third world countries. So I'm going to go for some simple numbers. So I'm going to assume that 80% of the population has access to internet in China. So total internet users in Russia and China, it's 4 by 5 or 0.8 into 1.5 billion, which is 1.2 billion. Hence, the total internet using population outside of China and Russia is 3.8 billion people worldwide. Now, we have assumed that Google has a 75% market share. So with 75% market share in search, total number of Google users worldwide will be 3.8 into 3 by 4 or 75%, which comes approximately to 2.85, or it's approximately 2.8 billion total Google users worldwide. Okay. Also, based on our previous assumption, average search queries per day per user will be 10 queries for the top 10%, then 9 queries for the next 10%, and so on. So this comes out to 55 upon 10 or 5.5 queries per user per day. Hence, total number of search queries will be 5.5 into 2.8, which is slightly to the north of 14 billion. So I'm going to assume it's approximately 15 billion. All right, so the calculation is 15 billion queries per day. If we divide this by 24, we get 0.6 billion queries per hour, or 600 million queries per hour. Divide that by 60, that's 10 million queries per minute. Now if I divide this again by 60, that's 0.16 million per second, or that's 160,000 queries per second, which sounds like an okay number considering the scale of Google. But let's do a sanity check here. So total number of internet users worldwide, we have assumed 5 billion. From there we arrived at 3.8 billion, out of which Google's market share is 75%, which is 3 by 4 into this, which is 2.8 billion approximately. This boils down to 5.5 queries per user, which is okay. 5.5 into 2.8, that's 14 some point something. That's approximately 15 billion queries. And post that, it's sort of a simple division. So it's 15 by 24, that's 5 by 8, that's 0.625, which is we have assumed as 0.6, which comes down to 10 million queries per minute, 160,000. Yeah, so it comes down to 160,000 queries per second. Okay, that sounds about right, yeah. Of course, I know that there can be a lot of variations and possibilities that exist, but as an initial ballpark figure, this approach seems to be simple, and it's good to have an approximate number. So let me know what you think.
That is a good approximation to get started. Thank you.
Alright, so that was a sample answer using the 4-step approach to answer an estimation question. Lastly, let's look at certain points to keep in mind before going into any interview that might involve a product estimation question. First, memorize basic facts. Before you even go to the interview, take time to memorize a few basic numbers. And we don't mean to memorize, we always mean try to have an approximate idea, try to have the general awareness, because it's almost always helpful to have these numbers in mind to bound your answer with reasonable estimates. And most of the time, these basic facts will help you in your solution. For example, taking 5 billion as the ballpark for worldwide internet users, or 1.5 billion as the combined population of Russia and China. Second, you need to scope out the problem and break it down to fundamental questions. If a variable of your problem is too technical, it can be difficult to estimate, even a ballpark figure. And in that particular case, you can go ahead and ask your interviewer for that particular information. Be very upfront about what estimates you are taking. Is that a ballpark figure, or do you have a good idea about that particular number? Remember, you can and you should always ask your interviewer the questions that you don't have an answer for. Third, you need to sense check your results. As mentioned multiple times in this particular video, it is crucial that you spend at least 30 seconds to 1 minute sense checking your results. In practice, you should check your intermediate results as you progress through the estimation, and your final result at the end. But here, we are checking all the numbers in one place so that it's easier for you to keep track of what you are doing. Always remember that there is no right answer. Be confident, and if possible and if time permits, explain to your interviewer what factors you would consider if you had more time. What elements did you ignore because you didn't foresee them to factor significantly in the calculation? This helps in anticipating your interviewer's qualms about your answer. When it comes to estimation questions, know that companies are not looking for a precise estimate, but they are more interested in understanding what your thinking process is. Thank you for your time, everyone. In case you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comment down below and we'll make sure we respond to each and every one of them. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.